Once again, for me, my break was like 24 hours because we had car problems and I ended up spending the entire rest of yesterday working on our car. So I am back, refreshed, as you can see, and ready to go for another day. So this is the last session for you guys. You guys, it's been like 15 minutes, but for me, it's like I've traveled forward in time and I'm starting once again with all the freshness and energy of a new day. So I'm excited. So I'm going to pray again because it's a new day for me. So thank you, Lord, for a new day. Just ask that you would bless this final session of class and that you would bless all the students, that you would touch them, and that your presence would just be with them in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So as I said yesterday or in the last session, I was going to show you guys a video. I'm actually going to show you two videos this morning because I was going to show one of these videos earlier, but I just forgot about it. So I'm going to show you two videos. One, they're both from in 2017, a couple of our outreaches that we had. And one is to Nicaragua. That's the first one I'll show you. And they're short. The first one is about 2.5 minutes long. And then the second video is from Turkey. It's one of our visits to Ephesus whenever we were feeding refugees. And so I mentioned some of this before where we were feeding refugees and all of these people just came running out of everywhere. And it's a pretty wild video. So I'm going to just go ahead and start those. And hopefully it won't make my fan come on or anything like that. So let's just start with Nicaragua. Enjoy!
Now they tell me at the top of this hill is an awesome view. Let's check it out together. I have not seen this yet. Look at that. That's not the God pub where we're staying. Now this is how you go to church, guys. In the back of a cow truck. On lawn chairs.
We're all gonna die.
And mattresses.
Locked
in. Alright guys, well, this is real missions right here. We're in the back of a pickup truck going like probably about 60 miles an hour down the highway, and it started raining. And so we're now under the tarp with the luggage.
Okay, so that trip to Nicaragua, as you can see, was in 2017, and that was an awesome trip because, I mean, those are, of course, when you go on an outreach, all you get is these little tidbits whenever you watch these videos. They're just little tiny bits over a decent amount of outreach. Actually, on that particular outreach, my family and I, when we were kind of hopping around with different partners in our ministry, we went through Nicaragua, through Guatemala. We went through, of course, we were in Panama, and we went to Colombia twice. And then right after that, I took my family home. And we were also in Costa Rica. Then immediately after that, I was at home for about maybe a week. And then I flew to Thailand, and I flew to Nepal, and then I flew to Turkey. And so that's what this next video is right after that, whenever we went to Turkey. But I just wanted to point out a couple things in that video. So there were a bunch of things, like when we're in ministry, a lot of times we forget about, or we don't realize the depth of some of the things that we're going to end up doing. Like one of those church services, There was one very small church service that you may or may not have even noticed, but there was only like 2 people in it, and that church was only about 5 people large. And the pastor there, it was a really, really intense service, even though it was so small, because the pastor's son had fallen out of a tree and died. He actually wasn't even that quick. He died. He was horribly injured, mortally injured, and the doctors there amputated both of his legs, but it wasn't both at the same time. They amputated one leg and then waited, and then they amputated the second leg. And in Nicaragua, I don't understand these laws, but in Nicaragua, whenever they would amputate a leg, the parents had to go to the city to pick up the leg, and then they would do a whole funeral for the leg. And so they had 2 funerals back to back, one for one leg, one for the other leg, and then the son died, so then they had another funeral. And this had just happened, I think it was just like 2 or 3 weeks, because this is over a year ago, obviously, so I'm trying to remember all the details, but he had died just like a couple weeks before that service that you saw in the video. So everybody was crying, and it was really, really intense service. And those kinds of things you end up confronting a lot when you're in this kind of mission, when you're in places like this. Like the last time I was in sorry, not the last time. I've been to Colombia so many times now. Probably about 2 times ago when I was in Colombia. It was not the video that you saw. It was after that. Whenever I was in Colombia, we had traveled I had traveled from David, actually from Volcan Chiriquí to Colombia with a layover. So it ended up being I'd say almost 24 hours. About that, yeah, because it was 4 flights. Doesn't seem like it because it's just Colombia, but I had to drive from Volcan to David, and then fly from David to Panama City. Then I spent the night in Panama City. Then Panama City to Bogota, and then from Bogota to Valledupar, where we stayed. And so we get there. I mean, it's tiring. You're tired, right? A lot of times when you travel, you're tired. And the first thing you want to do is you want to eat, and then you want to go sleep. But oftentimes you don't get that. So we arrived in Valledupar, and we're supposed to go work with the WeWa and everything, but we go to our host home, and we're tired, right? We just want to rest. We just want to put our bags down and lay down for a while. But instead, as soon as we get there, we put our bags on the ground, and our host home says, hey, there's a man who is he's on his deathbed, and the families are not believers, and that they heard that there were some missionaries that were here that were coming and wanted to know if you could go and pray for him. And so we of course, you agree to it, and we go in there, and I've been in this situation several times now, and if you're in this long enough, you'll end up in these kinds of situations too, where you go into this home, and the whole home is just people mourning and weeping, and it's very, very intense, and you don't know them at all. So it can be very difficult to come into that situation. You don't understand what's happening. You're trying to figure things out and get information from people who have been in this for a long time. In terms of the family, they've been in this situation for a long time. But oftentimes this is, for me, this is often how it's gone. Everyone is mourning, everyone is sad, so they don't really want to talk about it. So instead what they do is they just take your hand and they just walk with you into the room. And you don't know what's going to happen. And I've been in this where I've gone into a room and there's just a dead body in there. And we preach the power of God. We preach that God is a God of miracles and the miraculous. And so they want you to pray for that person to be raised from the dead. So this particular case is different because they take me into the room and there's a man laying on the bed who's just a skeleton. And he is on his last minutes. And whenever that happens, the breathing gets really, really fast. And he's just a skeleton with skin on, and he's just breathing really, 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 really fast. And they don't say anything to you. They don't tell you anything. They just pull you into the room and just make you go there. And then you're just standing there over this person who's going to die any second. And it was me, and it was a couple of my teammates from our ministry. And we're standing there in this room, and we don't know what to do. Now, you guys who are in missions training, you've probably figured out by now that missionaries really are just as human as anyone else. Most of us go into missions training, or DTS or whatever other training, and we're expecting all of the missionaries to just sort of be floating around and they're praying in tongues all the time and having visions, and they're just completely these sort of like supernatural beings almost. They're like the next thing to angels. And then we get there and realize that they're fighting over peanut butter, and there's politics. I didn't realize that there were so many missions politics until I became a leader in missions and started kind of growing in that more and starting to meet more and more leaders and realizing that there's politics everywhere. It doesn't matter where you go, you can't get away from politics. And you go in there, and so what happens is people who have not had any experience in missions, or they've grown up in the church hearing about missionaries and seeing missionaries come into the church and seeing the power of God, because the power of God does move, then what happens is they put you on this pedestal and they don't think you need any of the details, which we really don't, because God's the one who has the details. But as a human being walking into that situation and seeing a skeleton, a man who's basically just a skeleton, you wonder what happened here. You know, you start all kinds of things go through your head. How do I pray for this? What do I pray for? I don't know what's happening. And so anyway, in that particular instance, what happened was one of my other teammates, he was from the area, and so he started praying for this guy. And it was very cool on one hand, because the man had not responded or spoken or made any kind of movement all day long other than just breathing really quickly. He had been there all day long like that. And so when our team prayed for him, this one particular guy, he prayed for him. He preached the gospel to him. And that's the thing, you should always preach the gospel to them, because you never know if they can hear you. They may not seem like they can hear, but maybe they can. And he's preaching the gospel to this guy, and he tells him at the end, he calls him by name, and he says, if you want to receive the Lord right now, before you go, I want you to respond. And the man, for the first time in the entire day, he didn't say anything. All he did was kind of move his body a little bit, and he made a little grunt sound. And that was all he did. But for all the people who had been sitting in the room with him all day, that was like a miraculous thing, because they were all shocked, and they were like, that's the first time he's even made a move in this entire day. And so we believe that he did accept the Lord. We won't know, obviously, till we get there, but we believe he did. And then he ended up dying. He didn't get healed. We, of course, prayed for him to get healed, but he didn't get healed. He died just a few minutes later. And then we're in this situation where you're there, you know, and we were not there the minute he died, but we're there, and then right after we left, he died. And so you're still in this small town, you're still surrounded by people who know that you went in and prayed for him, and so there's all these kinds of things that you end up having to deal with. And so it's you get into these situations, I don't want to say a lot, but there have been several of these situations since I've been in ministry, and more so since I started going deeper and deeper into these unreached and more rural areas. I now focus largely on places where nobody's ever preached the gospel. So I'm gonna get this other video going. I'm gonna try and fix this glare on my side here that's coming. I think it's coming from the window over here. I'm gonna try and fix that while this video is going on. So if you hear some rustling around, that's me trying to fix this curtain over here. So enjoy this next video. Now this next video is from Turkey. I've already mentioned a little bit. It is us feeding refugees. These are Kurdish refugees and gypsies. And like I said, it is illegal to help them. So we would get in, we would give them some food, and then we'd have to leave right away. So enjoy. That is Ephesus, everyone. were buying the food for the refugees, we would have to buy it in all these separate places because we would get questioned by the police while we were buying so much food. We would tell them we were having a party. By the way, everyone you're seeing in these videos, these are all YWAMers. And most of them are from Colombia, except for this woman and her husband. They actually were just removed from Turkey. They were kicked out. But this girl's Colombian, and the other people that you see, they're Colombian. I love that place. Man, Turkey is absolutely awesome. They have the best people, the best food. It is just an awesome, awesome place. I want to go back after just watching that video. I'm like, I'm sitting here thinking, man, I'm gonna write the YWAM team there and go back as soon as I can, which I probably will next year. So we have a lot of things in the early year, but late 2019, I will hopefully be able to go back again, and we'll see. Depends on the visa stuff. Last time I left, they weren't allowing Americans or North Americans into the country anymore. So most of the missionaries there are not North Americans anymore. They're just a handful there left. So anyway, I love Turkey. So as you can see, we fed a couple thousand people during that time, and I was there for a couple weeks, and we would go out every single day because we couldn't do it all in one day, because every time that we would go and try to give out food or buy, because you saw there were just a big line of grocery carts, and every single time, well, most of the time we would get, no, I don't want to say, every single time we would get questioned by somebody, and whenever they would question us, we would tell them we were having a party, and of course, then they're always like, well, where's the party? We want to go. And so, but every single time, and because you can't tell them we're going to give food to refugees, or you're going straight to jail, because it's not legal to do that, especially to the Kurdish refugees. So we would just tell them we're having a party, and you know that we have to be very creative in those situations and what you're going to say, because your words are the difference between life and death for somebody, and that's not just. And I mean, you could apply that spiritually, but I'm specifically talking about these missions trips, these outreaches to locations like this. There have been whole teams that have been arrested because they went in, and one person on the team foolishly said, "Oh, we're on a mission trip. We're on our DTS outreach," and the whole team gets detained and usually booted right out of the country. If you get detained on the border, they're just going to kick you out usually, unless you're going like into North Korea. But most countries will just kick you out and put you on a plane back home because you don't know what to say. So you always have to go in, when you go on an outreach to a place like that, you always have to go in with your whole language has to be different in your mind. You can't use the word missionary. There's all kinds of things you can and cannot say, and especially whenever you're talking to officials and people that you don't know. It just is completely different. I mean, imagine having your worship times and having to be careful that it isn't too loud, because if the neighbors hear you, they're going to call the police on you. And it's not because you're just being too loud, but because it's Christian music. So it's a whole different world out there. Okay, so let's continue. And we were talking about all these different people groups, and because this is our last session, I want to see we're doing okay on time. Because this is our last session here, I'm gonna move a little bit quicker because I want to get through as many of these people groups as possible. I think we can get through all of them, and there are a few little other statistics I want to show you guys. But I'm gonna pull this up full screen for you, and then we will continue on from there. Okay, so we already talked about the Bathuti people. And I want to talk about my favorite people group in the world, and I've never been able to go to them. But this is like my bucket list of people groups. And whether or not God will let me go here one day, I don't know. But this is North Sentinel Island. Now, North Sentinel Island is possibly the most difficult place to reach on the planet. And what's so funny is it is right next to very populated and very developed, well, I don't want to say very, but developed areas. And so this is North Sentinel. Now, I show this picture first. So you see this little island. You look all around the island there, right? So there's the green landmass. And then next to the green landmass, you can see there's these white barriers. Those are all reefs. Those are coral reefs. And those coral reefs are the reason why North Sentinel Island was never, populated by foreigners. You know what I mean? Like whenever the Europeans were, that's the word, colonizing. When the Europeans were colonizing all around this area, which I'll show you a bigger map in a minute, don't worry about it. But whenever they were colonizing all around this area, they were going in ships. There were no planes, there were no helicopters, they were going in ships. And the ships could not get past these barrier reefs. So because of the reefs, the tribal people there, this is the only island in the area where the tribal people never were dominated by outsiders. The islands all around them are full of Westerners. They're tourist locations, because you can even see from this map here, the water is just blue and beautiful. And so there's a lot of tourism in the area all around. But to get to this particular island, you can't unless you fly in, which of course there are no airports or anything like that. It's a very closed off place. And so they are considered the most violent tribe in the world, and I'll show you in just a second. So look at this map here. You can see there's India on the left side of the map, and then the Bay of Bengal. Then there's Thailand. You can see Thailand and Malaysia. Now, right in between there, between the Bay of Bengal and Thailand, it says Andaman Sea. And then right next to the words Andaman Sea, there's a little string of islands there. That is where North Sentinel Island is. So that's the string of islands. And then you can't even see it on the wider map. But if you zoom in, like here, North Sentinel Island is right there next to all those islands. The red island right there. And all those other islands are in the Andaman Sea. And of course, it's a very popular tourist location because they're islands and they're surrounded by incredible water. But North Sentinel Island has never been colonized. So they're considered the most violent people group, tribal people group in the world. Now this video, see, these people, they can't even get onto the island because the North Sentinelese have killed or attempted to kill everyone who has ever tried to go onto their island. And so these people, I don't know the story behind this video. I know it's about North Sentinel Island. These people, they were going and giving them food. I don't know if it was some kind of weird tourism thing back in the day because this video is quite old. But they would go in and they would give them food. And that's all I know about the video. And you can watch it yourself. But what I do know is that the North Sentinelese have killed everyone who's tried to go to them. And I don't think any missionaries have ever tried to go, at least as far as I know. But there have been several instances of foreigners who have been killed by them because, for example, in 1981 there was a ship called the Primrose. You can actually still see pictures. I might actually have a picture on this next slide, but you can actually still find pictures of the Primrose because the wreckage is still there because they ran into those reefs, into the coral, got stuck, and immediately the captain had to call for a rescue and they were helicopters, call for a rescue chopper because immediately the Sentinelese people came running out and started shooting arrows and throwing spears at them and kept trying to get on the boat to kill them. Thankfully, the boat was the waves were so strong there that the Sentinelese couldn't swim to it, and so they weren't able to get on the ship. And it took them 2 days before a helicopter could get to them because the weather was so bad. And they ended up getting saved, but they're so violent. I'm guessing in this video they're not trying to kill the people simply because they must, back then, they must have known these people came and brought them food. So I don't quite know. But I do know that this whole island is restricted. You're not allowed to go to it because of the violence. And they're also incredible survivors. In 2004, there was a huge earthquake and a tsunami that hit, and it covered the island. And somehow, an unknown amount of them survived, but somehow they survived it. It was so bad that actually, I want to make sure I get this right. So that thing was so bad that whenever the earthquake happened, it actually literally physically lifted the entire island and added a whole bunch of new land onto the island. The whole place. I mean, can you imagine being that people group? What they must have thought. They must have thought the gods or something lifted their island and added more land to the island or something like that. We don't know. So we don't know what their beliefs are. Nobody knows what they believe, what their language is. Their language is similar to the Sentinelese language, of course. It's the other islands that's near. It's very similar as far as they know. But they don't know how many, it's a total estimate, but they estimate there's between 50 and 400 individuals on that island. And they are completely unreached. Nobody knows anything about them other than what you're seeing in this video and some other pictures. It's very, very unknown what they believe or anything. So this for me, I've often spent time thinking about how would you reach a people group like this that is so against you, that's so violent, that so doesn't want the gospel. How could we reach a people group like this? And they're not the only one. There are plenty of very violent people groups out there. I mean, all of us have heard the stories, Jim Elliot and different indigenous groups that just kill anyone who tries to come into their area. It's a very, 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 very difficult and complicated situation. This is why these people groups are still unreached. So they did kill 2 fishermen in 2006. There were 2 fishermen who just sort of drifted too close to the island, and they came out and killed them. But they are they have managed to adapt over all these years. They've managed to adapt to everything around them and survive. I think I have some pictures here. I put up that video is newer. I found that, and I used to just show these pictures here. You can hear my fan on my computer going again. After I showed those videos, my little computer can't handle all this stuff going on. All right, so let's move on here, and I'm just going to move fairly quickly through these slides. So these are the majority religions, and like I said, we've already looked through a lot of this, so this is just another very broad map. So the blue is where the majority of the population is Christian. The green is where the majority of the population is Islam. Yellow where the majority is Hindu, orange Buddhist, and purple non-religious, which that's largely what the government proclaims. I really don't believe that about China and Mongolia. I tend to think that it's more tribal religions, but a lot of times tribal religions are not counted into these censuses. All right, this one is very interesting. So this is the annual growth rate of world religions. You can see here that on the bottom, it goes through from 0 to 5%. Now, this is the growth rate throughout the world of it's the annual growth rate of world religions. So you can see evangelical Christianity is the fastest growing Christianity in the world, especially Pentecostalism. Since 1901, when Agnes Osman first publicly spoke in tongues, and the Pentecostal movement exploded because, believe it or not, speaking in tongues was not a common thing at all up until 1901. Really, during all those history years that I told you about during our first couple days, speaking in tongues, there was really just a few priests who would do it, a few of the old-timey saints that I told you about that spoke in tongues, but the mass Christian world or Catholic world speaking in tongues was not a thing. Even during the Reformation, after Luther and Calvin and all those guys, nobody really spoke in tongues. As a matter of fact, because of the belief in predestination, most supernatural things were not, except for in the revivals, like with Spurgeon and Finney and people that I mentioned before, Smith Wigglesworth, who had really, really crazy miraculous things happening, William Booth. It was kind of like a one-person show. There was like one or two people who would move in miracles, and they would move and all this kind of stuff. And it's just now, 1901, when Agnes Osman spoke in tongues, and the Pentecostal movement happened, the Assemblies of God was founded, and then all of the branches broke off, like the Church of God, all the different people. It was actually Church of God, and then the Assemblies of God, and then they would kind of broke off into their different branches and stuff. Because of that, now speaking in tongues is considered by a lot of denominations. They believe you're not even baptized in the Holy. And actually, I would say the majority of denominations believe that you can't even be baptized in the Holy Spirit if you don't speak in tongues. And a lot would even go so far as to say you're not even saved if you don't speak in tongues. And so that's very debatable. But I can tell you that up until 1901, the vast majority of Christians did not speak in tongues. And so it's a very interesting debate to put on people and say, well, you can't be saved if you never spoke in tongues before, because that would mean that we have almost 2,000 years, 1,900 years of people who probably only like one in the generation was actually saved, one or two, and a whole generation was saved because speaking in tongues was not common until 1901. Well, and even then, it was extremely controversial. And it probably wasn't until about the 1950s that it was actually like common. And not even until now, when the Pentecostals, which largely the evangelical church, is actually becoming commonplace and widely accepted. So you got to be careful what you have to take into perspective world history and how God has moved in the church throughout the years before starting to put big burdens on people. So it's just an interesting thing, and you may have questions about it. And again, feel free to write me. And I know that this is a very, very controversial topic, and I don't debate with people. I won't go into debate, but I do give my opinion, and then it's kind of we can talk about it. But I don't ever do debates with people, because people who go into debates always just want to win. They're not ever in it just because they actually want to talk things out and get truth. At least no person I've ever been in who's come up to me and said, I want to debate you, which has been several now. But they always just want to prove how smart they are and how much they know. It's never about learning truth. So then you can see the second fastest growing religion in the world is Islam, which is growing about half the rate of evangelical Christianity. It's about 2%, a little over 2.25%. And the reason for that, of course, is, who wants to join a bloodthirsty religion that hates everybody? who isn't like them. And the people who do join Islam, especially like the Western people who join Islam, usually, like I said before, are joining a really watered down version of it that has been westernized. It's like whenever you go and you eat Mexican food in the United States, you go, they tell you it's Mexican food, and you're like, man, Mexican food is amazing. And then you go to Mexico, and it's nothing like the Mexican food that you were eating in Texas. And all of a sudden, it isn't all of it's basically rice, rice and corn tortillas, and it isn't the crazy, whatever it is. I don't know. I can't remember the words right now, and I'm in Texas right now. That shows you how much Mexican food I eat. Chimichangas or whatever. It's not Taco Bell with the Dorito crust thing, whatever it is, with the Dorito shells. It's not the same thing. That's what Islam is in the Western world. People think it sounds so great because it fulfills the fleshly need to do works and constantly be doing things. And there's all these rules, and people who love rules love that kind of stuff. And so then they join it, and unless they become an extremist, they end up eventually realizing, oh my goodness, this is horrible, demonic, and evil, and they end up leaving. So Islam actually does not even grow mostly through conversions. They don't have many conversions. What they do have that the evangelical church does not is that they will have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 children, and most evangelical Christians, if they want kids at all, only want 1 or 2. And so the Muslims are basically outpopulating us more than anything, but it's not a growth of religion. After that, you have traditional ethnic religions, and this is an interesting one that it's growing. It's also growing at nearly 2%, and that one is growing because so many people are tired. They don't want the Catholic Church, they don't want the evangelical church, and they don't want to be part of Islam. So they go looking for traditional ethnic religions, and so that's why you'll see. Yeah, it's funny because of the Marvel movies out, but there was actually a time before the Marvel movies were coming out, and that probably still now, but now it's kind of funny because of Thor. But there was actually a movement before all the Marvel movies were coming out where people were starting to worship Thor and worship Greek gods again. And then the Marvel movies came out, and it just kind of became funny to think of Chris Hemsworth whenever you're trying to worship Thor. But there are a lot of these religions, like Druidism, like I mentioned before. Neo-Druidism has come back, and it's not big at all. But in Europe, there are people who do worship. There's so little understanding of Druidism left that they don't even know how to do it. But there's Neo-Druidism and all these different other traditional religions, shamanism that people are trying to do. Hinduism, about 1.5%. Because, well, it's Hinduism, and that's a difficult one. Now, the one that says Christian, so Christianity, that's just everything else. That's not the evangelical. That's whether it's Catholic or anything that falls into that category of Christianity. The world, this is just the general world population, how much it grows per year. So it grows about 1.5% per year. Buddhism, just over 1%. And then Buddhism is largely because they don't even know how to explain their own religion. We went into a Buddhist temple in my School of Frontier Missions. Went into this Buddhist temple and asked the Buddhist priest, the guy there in charge. We got to sit down in the room and just ask him questions, and he didn't even know how to explain his own religion to us. So they don't even know how to explain it. So how are you going to follow it? And then non-religious atheists, it's about 1% growth. And it's really, if you think of 1% growth of atheism in comparison to all the other religions, it's really backwards growth because everything else is outgrowing them so fast that they're, in terms of world population, are just shrinking. So it's really just, atheism is the most ridiculous of all the belief systems because it's the one that makes the least amount of sense. You have to have more, I know it's a common quip, but you have to have more faith to be an atheist than you do to believe in God. All right, what percentage of Christians are evangelical in faith? Just very quickly, you can look at this. Europe has the least amount of evangelical Christians, and then you have Latin America. Latin America is actually growing very fast. I think this slide probably needs to be updated because I'm sure Latin America is greater than that now. And then the Pacific, Africa, North America, and Asia. Of course, remember Asia, China especially, and those are, the Catholic Church is not really growing in Asia. we're talking, whenever the 10,000 people coming to Christ a day, those are all evangelical Christians. Largely Pentecostal, because for most of them, just to be a leader in the church, you have to at least heal somebody. Imagine that on your DTS. You couldn't graduate your DTS unless you went and healed somebody on the streets. All right, this slide always gives me trouble. Oh, well, you know what? All right, unevangelized population. So India, we're not going to go through all this, but 344 million people who are unevangelized in India, and this whole list here, this is, a lot of this is stuff you've already seen in maps. This is just a more specific way of looking at it. Countries with the most unreached peoples. We've looked at this. We're just reiterating a lot of stuff. I want to get into another topic here before we run out of time. So these are just people groups in the different nations. All right, just very quickly looking at a couple different. I almost went to Spanish there. A couple other places like Brunei. Brunei is the nation of Brunei is in the 1040 window. And they have a population of about 420,000 people. Their Christian population is about 11,000. But the largest religion there is Islam, which is 66% of their population. And they're in... It's such an interesting thing because Brunei, as like unknown as it is one of... It's actually the fifth nation... the fifth richest nation in the world, according to Forbes, based on the amount of petroleum and gas fields they have. So they're out in the middle of nowhere, but they are the fifth richest nation in the world. But they are, again, a very unreached nation. After that, we have Cambodia. This video here is of Angkor Wat, which is the largest religious monument in the world. Cambodia has 3.2%, 3.2 of the population is Christian. 1.2% of that are evangelical Christians. The majority religion there is Buddhism, which is 84, almost 85%, and the population is about 15 million people. So most of the ministry there, if you ever go to Cambodia, most of the ministry there is really interesting because it's mostly rural farmers and very rural, like just out in the middle of nowhere kind of people. And so, but because of the incredible amounts of war that have been there, like I had a friend of mine who was in my SOFM with me, School of Frontier Missions. My SOFM, he went to Cambodia for 2 years, and he was talking about how a lot of those places you went, you would go out to a farm to do some evangelism, but even when you were out there, you had to be careful because there's still so many landmines in the fields. And to this day, people still die from landmines. Even farmers do, because they'll be working their field and all of a sudden they'd step on that one spot that had a landmine on it and ended up dying. And apparently there's still millions of landmines around the country because of the wars that have taken place in that area. So this temple, Angkor Wat, was actually made originally in honor of the goddess Shiva, and then now is dedicated to Vishnu. So these are Hindu gods. Buddhism and Hinduism are so closely linked together. They're so similar, and they both come basically from the same thing, the same ideologies. Just the main difference is in Buddhism they're trying to become gods. And Hinduism, they believe they're worms worshiping gods. All right, East Timor. So this is the population here. This one is so interesting. The population is about 1 million people. They are 88% Christian, but only 2% evangelical. So in terms of Christian, that can vary. It can be Catholicism. It can be mixed with traditional religions, all kinds of stuff. But almost 40% of the population, look how beautiful it is, but almost 40% of the population of that country lives below the international poverty line, which means that they live on $1.25 US a day or less. And about 50% of the people in that entire nation cannot read. They're illiterate because of their struggle for independence from Indonesia because of the war. Even though they were able to become independent, they were so just devastated by that war that they still have that whole area has been crippled and they haven't been able to recover, because during that war at least 100,000 people died. And that's think about that. In a population of 1 million, that's 10% of your population killed in a war. All right, now these are the people. We're going to take a minute on these people. So the Dalits, these are all in India. I have so many slides. I'm trying to jump forward a little bit because I don't want to run. I want to get through as much as I can. Look at this. So the Dalits, these are the women. The women often have to clean out these sewers. This is the sewer system. They don't have a modern one. So they have to go through with these baskets and scrape out all the excrement. Oh, where did I... Okay. Look at this. This is all the sewage system. These are the guys doing it. But look at this. So India, we've talked a bit about India, but I want to spend a minute on the Dalits. The Dalits are known as the untouchables. They make up about 160 million people in India. So it's a huge percent of the population. It's 16% of the Indian population. And you can see the kind of lifestyles they live in. They live in the dumps. They live in the sewers. And the word Dalit is actually not their name. They're known as the Dalits because that's what the Indian people gave them. The Indian invaders. Look at this video here. This is the mines in India. They send children down into these mines to work. You remember we talked about child labor and child slavery. The Dalits are one of the biggest examples of that. They take these children and they make them go into these mines and work the mines, and they die and they get sick. See, look at this. They make these kids work down in these mines here. That would be a horrible working situation. But the word Dalit actually comes from a 17th century European word, which means to be suppressed, to be crushed, to be broken to pieces. And according to Victor Premaziger, that term actually it was given to them to basically curse them. It was a curse word put over them that was meant to show their weakness, poverty, and humiliation at the hands of the upper castes of Indian society. Because the Dalits were the original indigenous tribe that were in the area, and then the Indian people, they invaded. So the Dalits were originally, they were the Dravidians. That was their actual name, is the Dravidians. And they were invaded by the Indian people, which I'm trying to remember. I think that they came from Sumeria. I'm pretty sure that they were the Sumerian people, invaded and took over India and forced the Dalits into slavery. And still to this day, it just continued that way. But because of Hinduism, so I'm going to bring this here for you. So you see on this right-hand side, you see a triangle. There's a cloud above called the gods. The gods is, of course, the gods that they believe in. And India is known as a land of 100 million gods. They're actually, the saying is that there is a god for every person in India. Then you have the Brahmin, who are the priests and the academics. Then after that, you have the warriors and the kings, the merchants and the landowners, the commoners, peasants, and servants. And then there's even a space, and then the untouchables. So that's the Dalits. And those are the people who are outcast. They're the latrine cleaners. They're the street sweepers. And in Hinduism, there's no way out. I've mentioned this before. It isn't one of those situations where, like in America, there are no rags to riches stories where you can be born dirt poor in an orphanage, and all of a sudden you are a billionaire because you worked real hard. In those places, they believe that the gods have put the Dalits there, that they were murderers and evil people in the past, and so they are what they are today to suffer their punishment. They basically believe it's like a form of hell to be born a Dalit. And the Dalits, think about them. They are raised in that mentality that they were evil in the past life, and they need to make up for it in this life, so that the next life they can be born as something better. Which for them to be something better is an animal. The Dalits are actually considered less than animals. And just because remember, we talk, there's that whole saying, holy cow, and they talk about, they really do worship cows, they really do worship animals, and they see them as more valuable than Dalits. And one example, I have a friend who was in India, he was a YWAMer on his outreach. I don't think it was a DTS outreach, I think it was his secondary school outreach. He's on outreach in India, they're on a bus, and the bus is driving, and then it suddenly stops. People get out of the bus, including him, because there were cows on the road. And they all just stood there watching the cows, because the cow could be grandma or something. And so they just let the cows do what they want to do. Two Dalits come out, two Dalit men come out, and they shush, they move the cows along. They go shush, shush, and they make the cows move, trying to be nice so that the cars can drive by. Well, the bus people and other people in the cars, because there was now a traffic jam because of all of these cows, they got so furious at the Dalits that they would have the audacity to move the cows, which are even better than them, that they tied those two men up and burned them alive right there on the streets. And this is the mentality towards the Dalits. They are completely considered nothing. There's zero value for their human life. And because of that, I mean, they live just the most horrible, horrible lifestyles. So here's just a picture, some more pictures of where they live, kind of lives that they live. It's just a horrible. They are the lowest of the caste system. Just to hear, think about this. They've been in this situation for over 3,000 years, and their average income is $4 a month. They're forced to live outside of any rural area. They are the worst. They are put in the worst part of any system, of any city or any area where they're living. And I knew a girl once who worked among the Dalits, and this is a missionary girl, and she lived in the sewers with the Dalits, literally in sewage. Her bed was next to open sewage. 99% of Dalit students, they are in their schools, have almost no educational infrastructure. They don't have classrooms. They don't even have real educated teachers. They don't have computers. They don't have a library, and they don't have safe drinking water. Now here's some statistics from the Dalits themselves, because while I'm telling you this, and the situation is very, very bleak, at the same time, God has actually been moving among the Dalits over the past several years now, almost a decade now. Remember, they're a huge people group. For almost a decade now, missionaries like the girl I mentioned and YWAMers who've been going on their outreaches there, and all these different people have been going there. And so the Dalits, some of them have started to realize that they actually do have value. There are many that have come to Christ, and they're starting to realize they're not just nothing. They aren't worse than animals. They're children of God, and Jesus died for them. And so because of that, some of the Dalits have started to stand up for themselves, and they actually did a survey themselves and posted some of these statistics. So I'm going to read some of these things that they themselves posted. One is, every day 3 Dalit women are raped. Every hour 2 Dalits are assaulted. They have, like I said, they have no value in the Indian caste system. So people treat them worse than animals. I don't know if any of you have been up into like some of the tribal areas of Panama, like the Nobe. One of the most common things you'll see is a dog walks up. There'll be like a starving dog who just sort of walks up into the church or whatever. And it could be in the middle of the church service. And almost every single time, there will be several kids who will come up and they'll kick that dog, hit it with a stick, throw rocks at it, and really and then they all laugh about it because they think it's hilarious when the dog whines and runs off and is hurt. Well, it's the same with the Dalits. Because they're seen that way, people think that they find great pleasure in hurting them. And so whenever they have to live in these dumps and these trash heaps, and whenever they try to go out, they get beaten up and they get raped and they get murdered. Every day, 2 Dalits are murdered and 2 Dalit houses are burned. In 2005, which is whenever these Dalits put out these statistics, there were 26,000 crimes committed against the Dalits. almost 1,200 rapes against Dalit women, and 669 murders, that people who were murdered. So you can tell that this is just a brutal, brutal situation to live in. To grow up in a place where everything hates you, everything is against you, and even the animals are better than you. So they have no access to, they don't, their sanitation, where they have to go to the bathroom, is just open sewage. They don't usually have toilets. They have no rights in India. All right, these are just some pictures of their work. So like I said, they are the sweepers. These women in the bottom left that you see, their job is to go through the trash and look for anything of value, usually like aluminum or metal or something like that, in order to sell. The men on the bottom right probably have the best job, which is farming. The women on the top right, they have to clean the sewage because they don't have actual sewage system. They still use, it's basically the same as old medieval sewage. And the men on the left, of course, they're breaking up rock into gravel for construction. All right, so let's move on here. We're going to shift into the population. So I don't know, you may have heard about the 414 window by now. This is a completely different, so adjust your brain power for a minute, because this is a completely different topic than the unreached people groups, because we're getting to the very end here, and I just want to throw a few things out here for you kind of to close up. So the 414 window is children between the ages of 4 and 14 years old. You can see the population under 15 years old. So this is the percentage of people who are under 15. So if it's red, then over 50% of the population is under 15, which is not good, because that means that, if you remember, Africa doesn't have a very high life expectancy. You want kind of that balance of 0 to 20% under 15 years old, because it means people are actually living a long time, which is good. So what we see here is, this is the map, and basically I'm just putting this out. There's some research done by Barna. I like to do this because I work with youth a lot. I am a missionary first, but I love working with teenagers. I was a youth pastor for just 1 year, but it was one of my favorite years of my life. I still to this day work with teenagers quite a bit and really enjoy it. And so it's something really close to my heart. But I just want to put this out because oftentimes in frontier missions, children's ministry, and just in the ministry in general, children's ministry is often seen as sort of like the least important thing you can do. It's especially in churches, it's seen as your stepping stone to being like a real pastor or a real minister, a real worship leader. You start out on the worship team, and then finally you get to be a real worship leader, or you become a youth pastor so that you can learn, so that you can then be a real pastor of a big church. And the value of ministry to young people in frontier missions and missions in general, like YWAM of King's Kids, is often seen as the least valuable, because it's one of the most complicated ministries to do, and the loudest and dirtiest and noisiest, and it's seen as, because they're children, they're not seen as valuable. But this is just there are currently 1.8 billion people in the world between the age of 4 and 14. About 100 million children are born every single year. Now, the Barna Group, they showed that children between the ages of 5 and 13 have a 32% probability of accepting Jesus Christ as their Savior. That likelihood drops to 4% for teenagers between the ages of 4 and 18, and then ticks back up to 6% for adults older than 18. So think about that. The highest percentage of people who are going to receive the Lord are going to be between the ages of 5 and 13. 85% of people who accept Christ do so before the age of 15. According to the Barna Group survey, 4 out of 5 pastors, church staff, and lay leaders received Christ, or at least were involved in church for a number of years before they turned 13. So until now, pretty much everyone saw church, well, at least a lot of churches in Latin America, like in Panama where I live, for the most part, they don't even have youth ministries or children's ministries, because it just is not seen as valuable at all. because everyone focuses on the adults. The adults are the ones who give in the offering. The adults are the ones who actually make noise and have a voice in the church, while children, they just are generally just entertained. But if you look at it, if you want the most fruitful ministry possible, children's ministry is the way to go, because children's ministry is the most fruitful ministry that you can have. All right, well, I think that we are going to start wrapping this up now. There's so much that we could talk about, and honestly, I could continue to go on. As you can see, there's still a few more slides to go, and actually, maybe I should just no, we don't really need to go through any of these things. We've already covered a lot of it. The reason I'm not going through these slides is because of things that I already covered before when we were talking in other days, and it would just be repeating myself again. But what we can see here, I hope that through this whole class, through everything that we've gone through, that this has really broadened your perspective. That's really shown you how the whole world is kind of in a movement right now. The whole world is moving forward, and from the past all the way up until now to, if you remember, back whenever the Bible was first canonized, only about 10% of the world was Christian, and on top of that, there were only a handful of Bibles that were just partially translated. Now, it is expected that in our lifetime, before the year 2050, every language in the world, for the first time in history, guys, first time in history, we will live to see that the first time every language in the world will have at least the New Testament, at least portions of the Scripture translated into their language. That's never been done before. And that is one of the primary things, one of the primary blocks needed for Jesus to come back. And we are going to see it. We live in an amazing time, and there has been so much that has gone through. And I really want to encourage you to look up some of these things yourself and to study these things. And all of these different people groups, there's thousands more that we could talk about, thousands more, and thousands more that aren't even considered unreached. Like I mentioned, the Nobe, thousands more that have gone over that 2%, and they're considered reached now, even though there's a huge need for evangelism. There's a huge need for discipleship there. There's a lot of work to do, but we're also further toward our goal of reaching this world for the gospel than we've ever been before. Don't listen to all the gloom and doom. The Bible is very clear that there will be wars and rumors of war, and we're hearing all kinds of rumors every single day now. Don't listen to that. Don't let yourself get stressed out and worried about those things. Look at the reality that we are the largest, fastest growing religion in the world. The kingdom of God is winning, and it's going to continue to win. And it will be refined. The Bible says there is going to be a great falling away, but you know what? That great falling away is a refining of the church, where true saints are going to show up and they're going to shine. And we're going to see the greatest revival and greatest outbreak of the power of God that we've ever seen before coming up very soon. And it will almost surely be in our lifetime at the rate that things are going. I don't know if Jesus is going to come back in our lifetime, but I can tell you one thing. We are going to see some more and more incredible and amazing things. So I hope that you've been blessed by this class. I hope that you've learned and you've grown, and that this gives you a new excitement for Frontier Missions and for any of your outreaches that are coming up, and wherever it is you're going, whatever you're doing, whether it's going to be in Panama, whether it's going to be somewhere else. Wherever you go, just make sure that you go with the presence of God, and that you really bless and bring the presence wherever you go. So let me just pray and then close you guys out, and just, Lord bless you. Father, I just bless these students. I thank you so much for giving them open hearts and open minds. And Lord, I just ask that you would seal these things in their heart, Lord, and that you would bless them, that you would continue to help them grow and to learn and to be more like Jesus. We honor you, and we send them out in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, guys, thank you so much. Feel free to write me. You can write me. My email address is allen@foundministries.org. You can just look up our website too, foundministries.org. Again, my email, allen@foundministries.org. Or you can look me up on Facebook, Your leaders will have me on Facebook. You can look me up. I'll be happy to talk and answer any questions that you have. And I hope you guys are all blessed. Oh, also, all right, don't forget, if you want to look at some of these other videos, I have lots of these videos. You can look up Missionary Thoughts. I already mentioned this, Missionary Thoughts, on YouTube, not the Mormon one. There's the other one. And then if you want to see some goofy videos that I make, because my son and I make goofy videos, we also have a YouTube channel that we just created called Bearded and Smooth, because he's 11, so he's still super smooth up here. So Bearded and Smooth, and we have some funny videos that are coming out there. So you can, there isn't even a profile picture. We just created the thing, but we do have a couple videos on there that are pretty funny. So okay, have a great whatever it is, rest of your school, and I hope to hear from you. Many blessings. God bless.